Welcome to Fix and Fly, the business podcast, which identifies common business issues for you to watch out for in your day-to-day business life. So tune in every fortnight where we speak to leaders of corporates to SMEs where you can implement their strategies into your business. I'm your host, Larissa Logan from Fixity, where we help turn businesses around. So Shane, thank you so much for joining us on the Fix and Fly podcast today.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me, Larissa. I'm happy to be here.
And do you mind giving us a quick introduction to our audience who don't know you about your career journey and how you're here today?
Awesome. So I grew up in Cambridge, down the Waikato. Hairdressing parents, didn't really like school that much, didn't really get good grades. And I remember coming home and saying, well, I'm leaving school, I'm turning 15, and my parents sat me down and very nicely said, no, you're not. You're either going to go out and get a job in a trade, or you're back to school. So I sort of ran the numbers in my head and figured if I did a hairdressing apprenticeship back then, I could probably be out, I could be out if I passed in 3.5 years. So I thought I'd do that. So I went and worked for my parents for 3.5 years, and literally when I got out, I moved to Auckland, big fancy hairdressing place in Lawn Street. Worked there for about a year and a bit, so didn't really fit in. It was a bit of a country bumpkin. I gave it a good shot, and so I went and set up a tiny little haircutting shop and just doing I think it was like $15 haircuts. So by 21, I had 18 staff in 3 shops. And so, very early on, the lessons of managing staff and that whole scenario was, and you didn't really think about it. People would come and say, oh, you're so young. And I'm like, you're just doing what you had to do.
And that's where you developed your first product. Do you want to share that journey and that process with us? Yeah, sure. Quite
a cool, trendy area back then. Down High Street was all the nightclubs and bars and what have you. And you had a lot of the bouncers, a lot of the Pacific Island and Māori bouncers would come in and would do all their fades. They were all using Dax Wax or Murray's or Beeswax were the brands that were known at the time. Very, very heavy sort of petroleum-based product. And I ended up being the largest seller of those products in Central City, so I had a good relationship with the distributors. And I remember looking at the bottom of them one day and thinking, hang on, Dax Wax is 5 ingredients and one of them's fragrance. And one of my clients, his partner, worked with raw materials in the cosmetic industry. So I said to him, do you think she can get me these other materials? And he said, sure, this is over a period of time. So next month I've got these materials. I'm in my kitchen at home with a pan and I'm mixing this stuff up. And I was trialling it on myself to start with. I had sort of spiky hairdos. And then then I would bring it into work and I started trialling on these guys and they'd say, oh, can we buy that? I was like, oh, geez. So I had to go out and get pots and I bought a printer and designed up some labels in Photoshop and printed them out and then started selling this product to these guys. And it ended up doing quite well because it was a reasonable product and I really knew about the ingredients and the products and stuff. I had a flat in St Mary's Bay in Auckland. And one day, one of my flatmates had this new boyfriend come around, and he was like, "What's that smell?" And she was like, "Oh, it's my crazy flatmate downstairs making all this hair wax." And he came downstairs, and I literally was hand pouring all this wax out of a big pot. And he had spiky hair, just like me.
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. And I gave him some of the product. He came back a week later. And he said, "I think there's a business here. We should see what we can do with it." My now new business partner, Anthony AJ Gadsden, he went to the bank and got another credit card. I went to family and friends and borrowed some more money, and we used that to buy pots and labels. And then we went and presented it to, I think it was Food Town back then.
So how much did you need to start the business up?
Looking back, I think it cost us around about between 8 and 10 grand, I think, to start with.
So you were really bootstrapped right from the very beginning.
Right from the very beginning. Yeah. And we'd had a little bit of experience because I'd already been involved in the product, so I knew a bit about, the materials, the pots, designers. So we presented one single product to the supermarket and, they sort of rolled their eyes a little bit, but we were pretty convinced that we could make it work. So they gave us a shot And I think the buyer literally said, well, the consumers will decide, right? If no one wants it, it won't still be around in 12 months.
So you had that market validation, right? From selling it in the salons, going around the country, selling it to other salons.
Absolutely, yeah. And we knew we were onto a winner. So back then, Dax Wax was like $25. So the original premise was if we could make something as good or nearly as good and sell it for $20 or even less, it'd work. So we slowly started to, with this one single product, started to get busier and busier. So we created a bit of a scenario around it because he would literally turn up after work. He was corporate. I'd go upstairs and get changed, and then we'd get to work on our second jobs. We had a big cooking pot. Now we had a big tank, and I'd mix all the stuff up, and it would cook all day while I was cutting hair. And then he'd turn up. We'd get changed into gear and get gloves on, and we'd literally pour out all these pots. And then we'd have to let it cool. So we started by asking all our mates if they'd come over, like on I think it was either a Thursday night or a Friday night, we'd put on beers and pizzas, and they'd help us clean all the pots up and put the labels on and box it all up. And it was a bit of a production show that would happen. So eventually these turned into quite like big events. Over a couple of years, we'd probably do this every sort of couple of months. And then our friends started bringing friends. And then suddenly you'd have these massive amount of people turning up to help label the product. So it became a bit of a thing. And we ended up having to stop doing it because it was costing us a fortune.
Too much of a party.
We had to redo the labels the next day. So it was sort of a good growth phase. Though we had market validation. We knew we had a product that consumers wanted. We'd priced it right. We'd refined some of the manufacturing process. So we went and found. Well, I went to the contract manufacturers and found one that we could start making the product, and data was looking pretty good. So we thought, well, the world's our oyster, let's go to Australia. So we started going over there and having a look at the markets. And you're going to see this now from a lot of business people, smaller startups that have come to see us about it. Aussie's a tough market. I mean, you really can cut your teeth there, and if it goes well, it's awesome. A lot of the time it's a lot more challenging than people think. It's quite sophisticated, as in terms of, a lot more people, a lot more retailers. The expectations are quite a bit higher. So we started seeing one of the big retailers over there, and each time we saw him, he pretty much would say, I like it, but you need to go and change something, and it was lots of things like the shelf. We had too many pots in a box, it wouldn't fit their shelf, or it was too wide. So I think in 1 year we went 5 times back and forth over to Oz. And then on the sixth meeting, we knew we really needed an Aussie voice in these. A couple of young guys with spiky hairdos. We thought to get it over the line, we needed an Australian rep. So we found a guy there who then started coming to the meetings with us. And on the sixth meeting, we're in there, and we got ranging into one of the big retailers, and that was the game changer.
So how many retailers were you offered at that stage?
So I think back then we were in like 300 in New Zealand. And all of a sudden we got 1,200 in Australia, and from one meeting pretty much. Wow,
that's crazy. So, and then you had to scale up overnight.
Yeah, and it was a good story actually. So, like I told you, you're sort of going and selling this big story, but, things were, there was a lot of things that were still held together with sticky tape, right? So there was a lot of stress in that because there were so many things to learn, right? So many, a lot of them were repeatable, especially around like the cash and funding growth and, do you sell equity and bring people in and that whole bit. And we were just running like crazy to try and make it work. I think the important bit in terms of lessons was sort of getting that critical mass. There is a critical mass that you get to where, it's going to be okay, and you're always working on a new product. You're always trying to clean up something that's not working, but you've got a core business that's doing okay, and that's the tough bit to really get to, right? I think if you're trying to look back now, if we're trying to get 1 or 2 new products on, that's quite a challenging phase because there's no brand awareness. People don't really know who you are. So that was probably the biggest bit looking back that was really important for both the brand and the business. So we went on that. So fast forward a few years, we're going back and forth to Sydney to do these pitches. We were probably going over to Oz, 6 to 8 times a year, I guess. I got really bad eczema, like quite bad dermatitis. So I just stopped using a lot of the chemicals and what have you. I just couldn't do that. So I'd never been able to shave with a normal shave product, so I couldn't use Gillette foam. Like if I used the Gillette foams in a razor, it would actually break out in a really bad rash. And it eventually became a bit of a story years later with Shane and his rash, because occasionally I would trial a new product, and if it reacted, I'd have these bad rashes on my face. So I'd use a soap-free cleansing product to shave with. And Anthony would use this after-shave product because he would break out. And we're like, hang on, there's probably a business here. Like, why aren't we working on something? So we came back and thought there's a men's, skincare regime that we could do. And this is 2006, I think it was. So we started work on a new brand. We called it Primal Earth. It was sort of focused more on a natural offer. And the reason that natural was important to us back then is it was a lot of these other chemicals in it that would actually cause my eczema to break out. So that was sort of our segue into natural. Wasn't just that it was trending, it was trying to understand, about parabens and sulfates and sodium lauryl sulfate and all that stuff. So suddenly I became the expert in that. And I went down the rabbit hole deep in it. I spoke to a lot of the experts overseas. I looked at a lot of the science and the data. So we had a part-time cosmetic chemist at this stage. We'd set up our own factory. And I was literally coming back from overseas and making myself and then putting products on my arm and then using a razor to see if it would create reactions. So you were testing
the products on yourself?
I literally was the guinea pig.
Were there any shockers?
Yeah, there were. So I did about 200 different tests and came up with a formula that I didn't react with, and was using reasonably, natural material, New Zealand made material where I could. So we launched this new brand. So it was sort of doing it all over again. It wasn't really connected to our Dominate styling products. It was quite a different positioning. So the men's category is a lot smaller generally in our space, but a natural men's product was a smaller category again. So I think looking back, if I was looking at the data, we might not have done it. But we got into it. We threw a lot of resource at it. We launched with like 5 products, like 3 shave products. We'd been going back and forth to the UK. We got our hairstyling products. We managed to get into Superdrug over there. So we came back, we turned that into $1 million in sale, revenue, so not profit, revenue, in 24 months.
Wow, that's amazing, because back then men's skincare was not
tough.
Was real
so
tough. It wasn't, I don't think anyone would say, "Oh, I've got moisturizer at home and I'm putting it on." Yeah,
so there was there were a few trends happening back then with the metrosexual, right? You remember that?
Yes.
So there was some trends happening, but to your point, looking back, it was quite ballsy, and it was really driven out of a need. We're very early. And looking back, it really set us up for what ended up becoming our Essano journey, right? And so we identified that there was, the ladies' market in naturals was a big opportunity. And, so we spent a lot of time researching it. We didn't do it on a whim or a gut feel. We had a lot of hard data. And at that stage, if you wanted a truly natural product, you couldn't get it in the supermarket in our space. We got a pitch together. We went and showed one of our good retail partners. They were like, yeah, quite like it. If you can come back with some finished products. We had no design. We didn't have a name. We just had a concept. He said, yep, we could be interested.
That's when you know you've made it, eh? You can turn up to a meeting without the full pack.
We did, yeah. And so it's a good point. What we'd built up, we'd been going, by that stage, we'd been going 11 years. An overnight success in 11 years at this stage, right? And a lot of people would say, "Oh, you've done so well, so quick." I'm like, yeah, thanks. But no, it was actually all these really hard-earned lessons, right? So 11 years we've been going, and we had a lot of data, though. If this takeaway for anyone listening, getting that market research, market validation, getting the data, how big's the pie, really doing your due diligence on that space. If you don't understand it, bring in an expert that does. That's just invaluable. We understood, how big the market was, who were the players, what was the price points, what were the promotional programs we were going to have to hit. So we had a real reality check at that stage. We really understood that space quite well. So we go from, we've got a concept, then we're doing naming people and design, and that is exciting stuff. You really are building something from scratch, but you've got all this history that all the do's and don'ts that help contribute with it, right?
How hard is it to come up with a name?
Yeah, so naming's an interesting one because it's so personal. But the reality is, if you've got a successful product that people want, as long as you can pronounce it, you could just about call it what you like. Now, I'm sure people hear this and say, it needs to have a lot of meaning. And I think the main thing is that if you're going to be global, what you want to make sure is it's not a swear word and a foreign language, right? And I have seen people get tripped up with that. So it's hard in the terms of you'll come up with a name that you feel like resonates with your brand values, maybe in your ideals. But then you need to go and look globally and see what it means in these other markets, right? And then if you're going to be global, you've then got to go and secure the intellectual property on those markets. That's expensive, it's time consuming, and we got it wrong a few times ourselves. So yeah, that's so in terms of the naming, it's the implications if you do really well is actually the most important lesson out of that.
It's not as simple as just coming up with a name and someone signing it off, right? It's really looking at these other geographic locations and ensuring that you can use that name.
Absolutely, yeah, which is where you need proper legal advice around that stuff. And it is quite complex. Each market has a different set of rules around that stuff. It probably far too much detail to get in this podcast, but I could probably do a whole podcast on that because we got it wrong a few times. Some really expensive, valuable lessons around that intellectual property bit. So that, it's a real crucial part. So then we launched this product again. We had manufacturing, we had the chemists. Probably a bit I hadn't brought up. So cosmetic chemists, I ran the chemists because I sort of understood. I was, as the chemists would say, these highly trained people. I knew enough to be a pain in the ass and to be a bit dangerous for them. So I was very hands-on and helping with the formulation about what we could use and couldn't use and why.
And the live tester.
And we'd slightly moved on from that bit. Now we're doing ladies. So, and I probably need to put in perspective. We're a $10 million business at the stage, right? So we're a reasonable size for a business at that stage. We had a factory out by Auckland Airport. I think we had about 30 staff. We were quite vertically integrated. Between coming up from an idea, putting it into our lab, and then getting it to market, we could do really fast, and that became a really core competency to our business. I think if we were only using contractors, we'd be a lot slower. And that speed to market, especially in fashion, was pretty important to our journey. So we came up with 5 products, cleanser, moisturizer, I think body lotion. I should know this a little bit better now, right? It's not even that long ago. So this is 2012, 2013, I think we launched it. And we went and presented back then when you're going into, and again, this is quite an important bit for anybody listening if they take on board. So launching a new brand that no one's ever heard of is quite a risk, and especially in that consumer space where you're putting stuff on your skin, it's quite risky, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know who you are. Do I trust you? So we knew that was going to be a really important bit. So we'd learnt out of our Dominate styling market, what we'd done quite well were like little tiny mini pots. I think we were charging like $2 or $2.50, and they always went gangbusters. So they ended up being a really good travel item for people. But initially for mums, it was a good way. I've never seen this brand. I don't know if this product's going to work. So they'd spend $2.50. If they liked it, they'd go and buy the bigger pot. So we took that lesson and we came up with like a trial pack. And it was a tiny little mini of 4 products in our range. And I think we priced it at $20. And I remember we were like, couldn't really make any money out of it. It was really a marketing tool, right? But I remember thinking, $20, is anybody going to buy this for $20? So and it was quite a big box. It was about that wide. And we pitched it to the retailers, and he was like, and he literally said, there's no way that's going to work. But I like the rest of it, so I'll give it 3 months, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to have to replace it with other stuff because it was quite space hungry. Mm-hmm. Within 3 months, it was the number 1 selling SKU in the whole category.
Amazing.
The whole category. And there's 1,000 products in that category, right? So,
what do you think was the key driver behind that? Was it something different, new packaging?
Yeah, probably a few bits. I mean, we know, little cute mini sizes of stuff has always been quite popular and successful. I mean, if you look at a lot of the dupe trends that are going on now with MCO Beauty and stuff, they do a lot of the smaller size stuff really well. So I'd love to say that we knew that at the time, but we were really just thinking about how do we create a vehicle for people to get into a new brand in a low risk way. And it back in that time, it really obviously fit the market quite well. So, but it was very, very stressful because we hadn't anticipated doing that well. I mean, we'd had feedback that probably out in 3 months. So we went from, and these were quite complex pieces, pumps with caps and labels and like lots of really fiddly bits. And so suddenly we were making no money on these, right? They were marketing tools. Suddenly we went from making not a little bit of money to making a whole lot of no money. Right. So my first thing is how do we make these break even or make money out of these? And so there was a lot of time and efforts. I flew overseas to a few of the manufacturers and, how do we screen print these rather than labels? So there was a lot of that due diligence we had to go through.
Just to optimize your
just
cost efficiency.
Just to optimize it, yeah. And I still remember now, again, we're talking like 2014, right? So 10 years ago, we were looking down on the factory, just these lines of people furiously trying to label and put these things together. And we were working, we weren't working 24 hours, but we were 7 days a week, bringing in extra staff, and it was chaos. It really was chaos. Just trying to manage this fast growth and deliver a high quality product at the right price. So it went really well, and we've been asked a lot why did it go well, and I think I sort of highlighted we really wanted to make high quality natural products more accessible. And back then you pay a lot of money for these, and we were everything was priced around that $20 to $30. Whereas if you wanted a proper natural product, you were paying like $40, $50, $60 at health food shops or the premium ones. So we turned that into a whole shelf really, really quickly, and it doubled the size of our business in 2 years. So all the stresses and strains of managing staff and growth and what have you through that process was it was a very wild ride.
So how big did your staffing numbers grow over that 2 year period of growth?
Well, we literally doubled, I think, pretty much everything. So we would have got, I think if we had 30, we'd optimised stuff though. So again, I'm just trying to drill into the details. We started outsourcing some of the functions around the manufacturing of, there was a lot of assembly parts. So we went and found a company that we could bring in, and it was their staff, and they would manage and pack. So there was a lot of optimization through that process. How do we, if it works that well in NZ, let's assume it's going to work that well in Australia, how are we going to optimize for that? Because all you're going to do is scale your problems. So it's back to that, New Zealand market's good for testing, right? And again, we've tried to advise other people a little bit that, people will see it as being small, and it's, it's the size of Sydney in terms of volume, but it's a good test market for that. It's a really good reach of customers and skin types and hair types, and there's a lot of learnings you can get here before you go and scale and make those mistakes in Oz, which we did several times. I think we had a couple of, I'm thinking over the years, I mean, at its peak, we had 150 products over multiple brands, and you'd be rotating, 20% of that every year, right? So there's always new stuff being worked on. There's always stuff on shelf that wasn't working that you had to tidy up or reformulate or relabel or repackage. And that all takes time and lots of energy. So we had quite a well-oiled machine by the end of it, doing that process.
How important is it to have the right staff in your business, particularly given that it's a skincare business and you have, consumers putting this on their face? You want to make sure that you've got the right people behind the scenes delivering a quality product.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wasn't testing them on my arms anymore, which is people will be happy to know. We weren't making things in a big tank at the back of the barber shop. So, we had a proper factory and business at that stage. So we had right from marketing and innovation and demand creation, and there was a lot of work around that marketing space. So trying to make sure we had the best people in marketing. Was really
that
important.
In-house, or did you use external advisors?
No, all in-house. So we did use third-party companies for like data and consumer insights. that were just geared up, and that was their core business. And then we'd bring those insights into the business and share them. There was a lot of meetings with marketing and innovation around trends, and again, we're back into fashion, so it's very, very cyclic. Those cycles are so fast now, so you've really got to be on your game with that stuff. So yeah, we tried to bring in as much as we could in-house that made sense, but there was a lot of outsourcing of various departments too.
So what challenge do the likes of Chemist Warehouse, Superdrug, Mecca, all of these large kind of health and beauty retailers, what challenge do they actually have in the marketplace these days for businesses starting out trying to get into this industry?
I think it's just, there's a minimum hurdle rate you're going to have to hit, right? So I think I'll loop back to our starting conversation of restaurants, that market validation. Whether it's supermarkets or Chemist Warehouse, they will have a minimum expectation that you've done that work, and it's pretty risky just going by gut feel. And I think we need our systems and processes here to probably evolve a little more. We are a bit more data focused. Gut feel and tribe with my mates has a place, and you wouldn't want to discount that, but that you also now need to, you need a much wider pool of people to have tried your product and validated that they like it or they don't like it, and just get into that refinement process. And then when you can prove that and you've got confidence that there's a good market fit for your product, you go and present to these retailers with confidence that you're going to either bring new customers into their retail space, or satisfying a new trend that's happening, or potentially taking business from competitors. But that swapping piece can be quite risky, because your competitor might then just discount their product, and then the consumer will move back. So, it is reasonably sophisticated, but it's not rocket science. You just need a confidence in what you're doing and a repeatable cycle. There's always consumers wanting products, so it's repeatable.
So what level of control do you have when you're negotiating pricing with these large health and wellness businesses?
Very tricky question, isn't it? Look, if you have a product that customers want, you have a lot of power. If you haven't been able to prove that, they'll have all the power, right? Because they're taking a risk. They're going to give you this much space. They need a return on that space. They have KPIs, and if you're going to give a return or a better return than other products, then you're going to have a shot.
And how about, obviously, a few years down the track from your story, you engaged discussions with a PE firm. Had that always been on your mind?
I think reasonably early on, to some degree, yes. And I've heard people say, if you get into a business and think there's no exit plan, like when you get into a business, the exit plan could be that your kids are going to get it. So there is an exit plan whether you like it or not, right? Or you're going to hand it over, or a succession plan, right? So exit doesn't have to be you're going to sell and make a whole lot of money. It could be actually just going to pass the business on. So I think everyone has an exit plan. We knew that the space we were competing in, FMCGs, it's a great industry and category, but it's a very challenging one with big swings. So we knew there was a possibility that that one day we would be out, and what would that look like? So, but we knew we'd keep doing it for as long as we enjoyed being in the space, and we could grow it to a certain size. And it really got into that size, I think, in the last, maybe 5 to 7 years, it was a lot more corporate, and it sort of needed to be, because there was a lot more staff, there was a lot more risk. So we'd gotten it to a certain size and thought, we need to potentially bring in some people that can help us get the business ready for whatever that next phase might be for the new owners. And so that, sent us on a journey for private equity. We had amazing private equity partners. We were in business with them for nearly 7 years. It's probably a little longer than anybody originally thought, because COVID came along. But they were great monthly board meetings. They put in a lot more governance and structure and a lot of stuff that we hadn't put in place. And then eventually someone turned up and wanted to buy us. So we said yes.
So for someone that's looking at potentially entering into discussions with a private equity firm, what steps would you suggest that they take?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, you want a business that's in reasonable shape rather than one that needs to be fixed up, I would suggest. And a lot of it's to do with, what business are you in and what category and where are those markets going, right? Because you need a growth story, right? And we were pretty fortunate at the time that it was, natural products was having a moment. So I think it's go and speak to a few of the different partners, get your, make sure your financials are all the paperwork's in good shape, right? You don't want to go and then think, there's other stuff we should have done.
So if you were to look back over your 25-year journey with your business, what were some of the pieces of advice you would give your younger self?
Very good question. So I think that there's something around that be curious bit, because as you've heard the story, Larissa, it's really been a journey of lots of people helping us along the way, right? There was no it was my story or my business partner's story. There were many, many challenges and some of them, they were, I look back now, they were pretty tough challenges. GFC, we went through a period of over trading. I heard, was saying earlier, we were selling a lot. We couldn't get the money in fast enough, so we had to go through that journey. And right through those, I think there were some pretty tough days where you'd battle all week and you knew you were going to have to get back up and do it again on a Monday. And so it was going and asking, the right questions to the right people. And people want to help you out, and I think I don't think there were dark moments, they were just tough moments where you got quite weathered and beaten down. And then you'd go and speak to someone that probably wasn't in your circle and ask them for help or advice, and people would give it, and then the clouds would part and the market would turn and things would go right again. So I think over time, if you're going through tough periods, you've just got to really grind through that, and the clouds do part, and there is opportunity. I think in the toughest ones, again, the GFC was really tough for us. We went through, went from this really fast growth and burning a lot of cash trying to keep up with it, to the GFC just turning all that off. That was a real stressful period. And then trying to run around trying to raise finance or raise equity when everyone else was also doing it in a similar market, because that was the environment back then. That was quite challenging. Probably a little bit like it is maybe, I believe, for some businesses now. Valuations are down and it's a bit tougher to get finance and what have you. So you just got to get back to your basics. What's the core of the business? What do we do really well? Get rid of all the noise. I think it's easy to get on these vanity projects too, where you've lost focus of what your core business are. What do my customers actually want? And get back and just do that really, really well. And that would be my advice to anyone that's sort of battling it at the moment too, right? You'll find when you get into it, people are quite often not focused on the core business. They're focused on these other fluffy things, making them feel better about it maybe. So that would be my main advice. So
what's next for you?
Well, look, I'm not one to sit still. So I have been practicing that though, that my not running off and scratching an itch and filling that hole is something actually I plan on doing for a little bit. And then we'll just see what opportunity turns up after that. So I'm working with a few smaller, awesome companies, not in our industry, in different industry than cosmetics. Very, very similar challenges, and just trying to give back where I can a little bit, and enjoying seeing them go through their growth. And as a lot of people did in our journey that were sort of hands up, I tried to be available for other businesses to do the same. So if anyone wants to make contact, I'm more than happy to, if it's worth anything, I'm more than happy to give my 50 cents worth.
That's awesome. That's passing the baton, right? And that's the Kiwi.
As people did for
thing.
us. It's a Kiwi thing. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the Fix and Fly podcast. I really appreciate it. And, I can't wait to see what you do in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Larissa. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you enjoy the Fix and Fly podcast, make sure you like, comment and subscribe, and share with anyone you think will find this useful. We look forward to seeing you next time.